Battered, bruised, but not beaten. Norwich City were on the ropes and being forced to take punch after punch after punch at the CBS Arena. But somehow they remained standing after 12 brutal rounds against Frank Lampard's men and very nearly came out the remarkable victor. Zoom out, and it's now 7 points from a possible 9 on the road to start their championship season. But zoom in, and there are some red flags emerging that require improvement. Welcome to the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, and I'm joined by Paddy, Davitt, to reflect on the events in the Midlands. And I guess, Paddy, probably the first question to ask is, how on earth did Norwich City walk away from that game with anything in their back pocket, let alone a point and very, very nearly 3?
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it is the metrics underline what you probably saw in real time, but the differential in the attacking metrics, shots on target, shots in total possession, final entries into the respective boxes, all of those not only, edged by Coventry. I mean, it was landslide territory, to use a political analogy. And but to counter that, there's one stat that really matters, and that's the scoreline. And up until the 96th minute, that was missing. There was the Great Escape theme tune from the away end, because it was. We'll dig in. We'll get a trench going here on the edge of our 18-yard box, and if they breach that, we've got Serbia's answer to Manuel Neuer / Dino Zoff with some of his agile shot stopping ability. The two centre backs in front, up until that very defining moment where it looked like the tank had finally emptied from Harry Darling's epic shift, and just a fraction too slow. Van Erwijk diverts it to Sims, and then even the finish from Wright. I mean, I don't know if you want to be generous and say that was a very deft flick, but it looked like it almost just hit him and rolled over the line. It was a bit of an agonising wait for it to cross the line. But when the dust settled, a point apiece, and that if you're now accentuating the positive, as you said, Connor, off the back of wins at Portsmouth and Blackburn, is nothing to be concerned about. It's actually a body of away productivity that they've killed for last season under Torop. So that is a step forward, no doubt about it. But you dig not that far below the surface, and the manner of the performance, particularly in possession, and obviously, as we've said, the positive stats from a Coventry perspective, you flip that, and it was 4 shots. I think Norwich must have 1 on target, 36% of the ball. That's nowhere near good enough, home or away. And to be given his due, Liam Manning came into that press conference room at the CBS, sat down, and didn't look to overplay how good we were out of possession, the togetherness, the resilience, the willingness to resist and just defend your box. He referenced all of those factors, of course, but it felt to me he tipped it more towards, no, that's not good enough. Where's my frustration is in our inability to control the game through the ball, to be better in midfield and forward areas. And as a result, just give Coventry effectively carte blanche to dominate that game from start to finish. And you do walk away from that game, and then it's reaffirmed when you see the match stats and think, how on earth did Norwich escape with a point? And because really, Coventry, that was the scant minimum that they deserved. And as a result, a little bit conflicted, I suppose, because you can't argue with 7 points from 9 on the road, but you just think in terms of the sustainability of it, how sustainable would it be now for Norwich to continue down this path of almost despite themselves picking up results, particularly away from home, because obviously at Carrow Road, the reverse is the true measure at the moment. 2 back-to-back league defeats and a League Cup exit as well. And, the reality is it should be the home form is your base, your foundation, and then you add to it on the road, and it just feels probably overriding sense after that 90 minutes at the CBS is that they didn't kick on again from Blackburn in terms of performance. Yes, they got a result, almost matched the result at Blackburn in terms of 3 points. But I don't think anybody would kid themselves, either of the 2,700 who were at the CBS or any Norwich fan consuming that from further afield, that they were very fortunate to escape with a point. And the manner of that performance, individually, collectively, would be more concerning for me, because that was regressive from Blackburn, whereas we all hoped that maybe Blackburn was the start of something a bit more consistent in terms of performance, in terms of results. And as I say, keep caveating it. It wasn't a defeat. It was a draw, and it was a good point against the Coventry team who looked, I think, well set to be in and around that top 6 conversation as they were last season. Very, very impressive. Their methodology and the way they controlled that game and the attacking threats they had, and their midfield. I love that blend. Norwich was second best and then some in that central area, which poses questions. Will Pella Matson now, off the back of that, come into the side, into the thinking for Wrexham? We won't get too far ahead yet. But all in all, when the dust settles, when we get 3 months down the line, you'll look back and you'll probably say that's a good point at Coventry, and probably less concerned about the performance levels if, in what comes now, we start to see something emerge that is far more confident in terms of Norwich can go on and have a similar type of season to Coventry. Because you look at that yesterday, and just in terms of the two respective teams and what they were trying to do and how they were trying to control the game, it was chalk and cheese. So, if that is the case, then, you left there thinking, absolutely, of the two managers, it's Liam Manning who has far more on his in tray than Frank Lampard. But final thought I would say on this section is, and Liam Manning referenced it, Lampard, Coventry are much further along in this evolutionary path. And Liam Manning has talked a lot about the process. And maybe that graphically illustrated it yesterday, that there are some shortcuts he can take. But in terms of when you come up against the top sides in this division, maybe it is just a process. Maybe it is just time. But that isn't to give anybody a free pass. Too many individuals were below par yesterday. And collectively, they were below par with the ball. And that does need to change, because we've been told expressly this isn't another transitional season. That's not a word you will see bandied about by anybody inside that football club. This season is about targeting and attacking the top 6. And performances like yesterday make you feel that is quite a long way away at this stage.
Yes, and I think that confliction is a good summary, because I kind of, in my verdict, said it was a good result. And I think going away to the CBS for any team probably in the Championship this season, even those that have come down from the Premier League, if most of them walked away with a point, I think they'd be pretty content, irrespective of the journey and how you get there. But again, it's that sustainability question, isn't it? And the fact that some of the stuff we are talking about and we'll talk about over the next hour or so isn't new. It isn't just on one game. And of course, we're 5 games in. Like you say, there's so much football to be played and hopefully so much improvement to be extracted. But it's the sustainability of it. I mean, we tend to like to sort of spout some numbers at you. So we'll do that again, because I've kind of put some together on this game. And like you say, Paddy, it was really just that scoreline that was equal. The expected goals rate, which again I know is a stat that some people do like, don't like. It is essentially a statistic that grades the quality of chances a team has and gives up. So I think there is some merit in it, and we'll add some sort of colour to it afterwards. But it was 4 for Coventry. For context, that is the highest number that Norwich have had against them in a game since a 4-0 defeat to Manchester City in the Premier League in December 2022. It is also the highest expected goals against number in a Championship game since that record began getting recorded from them. And even if you go down to a micro level, Coventry had 28 shots. They delivered 37 crosses. They had 52 touches inside Norwich City's penalty area. Again, for some sort of historical context on that, 28 shots is the most an opponent has had against Norwich in the Championship since that 4-4 draw against Southampton back in August 2023, which of course was was David Wagner in charge. Christian Fashnak scored. I think it was Russell Martin, Southampton, wasn't it? And then I guess we'll probably move on to maybe some of where that stuff places them in terms of the league rankings. But I think that shows, Paddy, doesn't it? Those numbers, the volume of chances they conceded, and again, you can zoom in on their kind of champion, their rear guard action as well. And had it not really have been for that trio, Harry Darling, Jakov Medic, and Vladan Kovacevic, I think we'd be talking about a very different game. I mean, this is courtesy of NCFC Numbers on X, who produced some very good Norwich City stats. Norwich blocked 15 shots yesterday, which is their most in a single game in the last 15 years. And in terms of the goalkeeper Kovacevic, who we've spoken a lot about in these podcasts, particularly after away games, another flurry of excellent saves. There was one that he parried around the post, wasn't there, almost at the second attempt. There was that save from Ellis Sims in the second half. Of that kind of 4 expected goals, the way it kind of portions itself up, the numbers suggest that he kind of protected 1.6 of it. So we're talking about nearly half of Norwich City's expected goals against that he prevented. So 1.6, you could round that up. He's essentially saved them 2 goals, if that's sort of the numbers that you want to deal in. And as you say, Paddy, it's all very well and good talking about those numbers. And of course, it's a 1-game basis, and we'll get into the various trends over the course of the Championship season so far. But that is not a sustainable route for Norwich City winning games. And I think if you're a fan, and some fans will think this today, having woken up and reflected on it, having seen the level of investment and accepting this is a team at its very infancy under a new head coach and learning. But like you say, it's probably that expectation that maybe they would be a little bit further along to be more competitive in this game than maybe ultimately they were against Coventry. I'm not saying that's necessarily my view, but it will be a view that is put out there. And it's those numbers pretty stark picture of their efforts at the CBS Arena and just how dominant Coventry were over them yesterday.
Yeah, and it's the scale of the difference, as you rightly say, that the context you have to wrap around this is, and I referenced it in my first remarks, is a Coventry team who've been maybe 12, 18 months in the building, or a squad. And I know they've changed managers subsequently, but there has been a consistency of approach. They're off the pitch, on the pitch. In contrast, this last summer, to give you a comparative, Norwich made 12 senior signings, they made 4. So that tells you they were looking at tweaks rather to what Norwich have embarked on, which is almost a whole-scale turn of the wheel in terms of squad. All of that, you can't dismiss that. That is facts, but to be that far off it would be troubling. And Liam Manning, as I say, didn't need to be prompted. He acknowledged those facts, but also said, no, we need to be so much better on the ball. So straight away, at least you've got, if you're a Norwich fan, you can listen to your head coach sat there in front of a camera, and he isn't trying to mask that how far the gulf was on the evidence of that 90 minutes on Saturday afternoon. So that's, for me, positive, but it's how quickly they can bridge the gap. And we're using Coventry as a benchmark because obviously that's who they've just played, but you can put in maybe the 3 relegated teams who've come down. Likes of Borough started well. The bracket of clubs who we could all realistically maybe put on a piece of paper, we expect to be at the right end of this table, and then throw Norwich in there comparatively. And the margins cannot be as wide as they were yesterday. And of course, you're coming to a Coventry team who'd scored 5 more goals than any other team at kickoff in the Championship. They'd put 7 past QPR last time out of the CBS. They are set up to be a very front-footed.
Just on that, sorry to jump in on the numbers. They had fewer shots and a lower expected goals rate against QPR and scored 7 than they did yesterday against Norwich, and scored 1. And like you say, that came about very, very late. So you can understand why Frank Lampard probably was feeling quite sick after the game at how it all unfolded, given their dominance.
No, exactly, yeah, and also as well. I mean, you referenced Frank Lampard. He was asked about whatever you want to call it, game management, time wasting tactics from Norwich. I mean, I think that's pretty indisputable. You see Kovacevic and Fisher getting booked before the first half's out for essentially delaying restarts. The serial amount. I mean, how many players went down? How many times were the Norwich physio staff on? All of those elements. While you need to see that within, particularly when you go away from home in the Championship, because too often it was the other side of Norwich last season under Torop, and they were too soft and they were too easily rolled over, and the Tom Cleverley dark arts label. So you need that clearly, but it was almost as if that's all Norwich were clinging to yesterday at points, certainly in that final quarter of the game, where it was effectively, it was the keeper and it was the 2 centre backs and torrents of attacking intent from Coventry, who of course we're going to get increasingly desperate as they try to chase a result. But that in itself was a little bit concerning, that cutting to the heart of Manning's point. They wasn't able to control or keep Coventry at arm's length or take the heat out of that through what they could do by controlling the ball, through how they were manoeuvring Coventry about, through the patterns of play. All of that for me is the more concerning elements, rather than, at this stage, maybe sort of looking at the metrics and they're so far off it. It's surely 5, 6, 7, 8 games in now, you would expect, even going to a side who are probably as good as any at home currently in the Championship, that they wouldn't be that far off it in terms of the game and the control of the game. There was, you're almost struggling to think of a passage of actual passing play from Norwich. I think it was 1 or 2 just before actually Chris Garden's goal. But beyond that, how many times did Norwich actually put phases of play together? I can't think of too many at all. And as I said earlier, central midfield, always a crucial area. Certainly in the Championship, they were so far off it against Torp, against Grimes, and against
Rodoni,
who's an excellent player at this level. And you lose as decisively as they did that area of the pitch, then your back four is going to come under pressure and your attacking players are going to get isolated. So that, for me, is where I would be starting this debrief moving forward now, is how you can establish against the better sides far more control in that area, or at least parity, to then give yourself enough of the ball that you can then try and release a Sargent, Chris Garden, Jallow, Cernach, because there was none of that yesterday. And that's probably more so than the metrics. The metrics sort of point to these issues, but they're the structural underlying trends that are reaffirmed by those metrics, but that Liam Manning and his coaching staff need to get hold of. Because let's be honest, he said it in the build-up, almost off the back of Blackburn. The challenge now is what they'd shown maybe in 30 or 40-minute clumps at Blackburn. I think Watford in the first half in the League Cup. There was slightly smaller samples against Millwall and Borough of that control, of Norwich on the front foot, putting teams back, asking questions. He was more or less challenging them, right, you've nudged it up to 30, 40 minutes. Can we now do 60, 70 minutes in a game? Well, unfortunately, it went completely the other way, and I don't think it was maybe 5 minutes yesterday. So he knows that. He knows, he can see that those are areas that him and his coaching staff have to almost prioritise now, and that needs to happen pretty quickly. And whether that is personnel, whether that is just going back and having maybe a think about the setup and what they're trying to do against the better sides. We have to keep making that point, because it's only by being far more competitive than they were yesterday that Norwich are going to be anywhere near that top 6 conversation. If they're so far off it and almost having to cling on for dear life to get a result against these teams, then that is a season that plateaus again around 10th mid-table, and that's the scale of the transfer turn this summer, bringing in Liam Manning, what he did with Bristol City last season. All of those elements were designed to get this club to be out of that mid-table plateau to competing in the top 6. So, I feel we probably just need to put a little bit of note of caution in that we don't want to get completely into a navel-gazing phase here that they've gone to a very good Coventry side, a cohesive Coventry side, a Coventry settled Coventry side, and been a long way short. Let's not extrapolate that this is now the season set for us, and Norwich are going to be so far off it. It's not going to end well for any individual. But by the same token, you can't overlook how second best they were yesterday in terms of patterns of play and control of the game, and just a lack of competitiveness with the ball, really. Not without the ball. They were that and so much more besides, funneled through Harry Darling principally, but that isn't going to be enough to get themselves in that conversation. And that's ultimately how this group, Liam Manning, the people above him, will be judged at the end of the season by Norwich fans, is have they delivered on getting this team in and around competitively the top 6. You would say on the evidence of yesterday, there is still a hell of a lot of work to do.
Absolutely, and that is why there's that confliction, because from a results perspective, I don't think anyone would argue a point away at Coventry. In terms of a performance perspective, there is clearly a lot to look under. But again, with the context, we're 5 games in, this is a new group. It is going to get better, and in fact, we have seen individuals. Some of those guys you mentioned, Vladan Kovacevic has undoubtedly got better over the course of this 5 games. Jakov Medic, I thought yesterday was by far and away his best game in a Norwich City shirt. Harry Darling has looked tremendous. Mirko Topic has shown some real flashes. Mateus Christgoren, who we'll get onto later, I thought he was good in the touches that he did have, and clearly took his goal very well. There were positive aspects, but clearly it's about that collect stuff. And I'm glad you mentioned the stuff on the ball, because I don't think this is just a debate about Coventry. I think that has been a theme probably of their opening 5 games. You go back to Millwall, where the goal they scored ultimately was off of Josh Sargent's backside. Middlesbrough, clearly, which was quite similar. Blackburn, where there were spells again. Portsmouth, where they didn't have that much of the ball in the second half and had to soak up a lot of pressure. And that is why ultimately they are finding themselves in these positions where they're having to sit in block really deep and having to soak up loads and loads of pressure, take punch after punch after punch, and rely on their goalkeeper to bail them out with saves. I mean, how many times were we sat there yesterday, Pat, going, what they need is just a little spell with the ball, just to ease that pressure in a different sense, regain some control, feel their way into the game. And sometimes it's just about almost building your way into a contest and trying to get yourself 5 yards up the pitch time and time again. And that possession issue isn't a new thing. And this is where I guess the contrast is, because you look at last season, and actually it was the one thing ultimately, probably above all else, they were really good at, in terms of having the ball, their safety and security with the ball, and building up on the pitch. They weren't that great defensively or out of possession, and there were big issues. And this year, so far, it's kind of felt like the reverse of that. They have been much better out of possession. Their press is much more organised, and there's been some green flags, I guess, if we want to use that analogy and continue to use that their press is beginning to yield some results in terms of high turnovers, and that leading to shots and whatnot. But again, equally, they're not really. They're not really. There's not many patterns of play, phases of play that I'm seeing at the moment from either a deep perspective or from an attacking perspective, where I really know how they're trying to attack or what the sort of plan is with the ball. And but ultimately, Liam Manning has come in. He's seen a team that conceded shed loads of goals last season. I can understand why the focus has been on organisation and trying to get them a lot more competitive out of possession. And to an extent, they've done that. It's hard to argue with sort of what they've done in terms of that. They're still conceding a lot of chances, though, is what I would caveat that with. But in terms of that will, that want to defend, as we saw yesterday, that want to block, that want to and some of that comes down to togetherness and culture more than it can do tactically. But it's that on the ball stuff, Pad, isn't it? I mean, they had Josh Sargent had 13 touches of the ball yesterday, 2 passes into the penalty area that they recorded throughout that 90 minutes. There's just not enough signs of them making progress on the ball, and that feels like, and again, it's not saying any of this, and we're not saying any of this to hit the panic button or to suggest it's all awful and it will remain all awful, and this is the season and this is the course that they're charting now for the rest of their campaign. It's just with a focus of actually, this is the area that they most need to fix now going forward in this next block, because ultimately, if they can add that on top of this defensive stuff, they're going to find themselves under a lot less pressure and probably conceding a lot less chances as a result. And it doesn't half make their life easier. And again, it's we talk about it, lots of new players, lots of stuff that need to gel. You have to build. There's various phases. We use the analogy like a house, don't you? You build your foundations, then you've got to add the floors. And this now feels like the point where some of those floors, in terms of the possession stuff and the attacking stuff, those now are the aspects that need to be added to Liam Manning's build, I suppose, if we're to sort of continue with that.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent summary, and that's where it is. And all of those points in various press touch points we've had with Liam Manning, he has flagged that there was almost the initial focus was cultures, behaviours, that pride in going certainly away from home and defending your goal and getting something just through sheer will and character. But those are only a part of the attributes that you need if you're a group and a club who are realistically targeting the top 6. You then need to add those other elements. And that's kind of, it feels now, certainly off the back of the Coventry performance, in inverted commas, where we're at. That the questions aren't about, well, this team aren't going to roll over. This team are going to roll their sleeves up. When the pressure comes on, they're not going to wilt. I think there's been enough circumstantial evidence that is there now, that those elements are. And that is a contrast, let's be honest, over the entirety of last season under Torok to now, albeit slightly smaller sample. But I think it's fair to assume that they're not going to retrench in terms of those attributes. They're now baked in now. He's clearly got the right characters in terms of personnel, and you're starting to see that defensive resolve come through now. But as you rightly say, you don't want that to be your USP now, and you have to rely on repelling wave after wave of attacks. And it won't be Coventry and their array of attacking players every week in the Championship, but if you're coughing up that amount of chances or generous amounts of chances, most teams in this league will be able to punish you. So that isn't a method for progress or advancement. What is to take that, don't take it for granted, add to it, keep refining it, but then where we're at now is find something that is able to resist and be resilient on the ball, and certainly again away from home against a good side, to keep them at arm's length and not allow. I mean, it was just a routine, though, working the ball out to Mason Clark on one flank and Sakamoto on the other. As I say, those three central midfielders, the rotation, the movement, the fluidity, and Norwich seemingly were not able to stem that in any way, shape or form. And then when the times when they did get the ball, I mean, you quoted to me a stat before we started recording that the pass completion rate was horrendous. That lack of care, that lack of precision when you're under pressure. There's a few times there. It's not singling out particularly individuals, but Topic, McLean, they're on the ball. You've got Jallow making runs into the channel and just heavy balls, under-hit balls, and it's back with a Coventry defender, and off we go again. Can we hit Sakamoto? Can we hit Mason Clark? And that carelessness, would be something I'm sure that would really irk Liam Manning and his coaching staff, because that isn't something that at this stage you can put down to an evolutionary process. That's just players taking responsibility, as Liam says, do the basics. Norwich aren't doing the basics well enough for a prolonged period in these games, and as a result, they're finding themselves under too much pressure. You do the basics right, you take care on your passes, you do things with a quicker tempo, then you start to get more of the ball, you get yourself up the pitch, you're getting more possession territory, teams are having to dig in then, and then you have clever players to release. Sargent, Quisgard and Jallow, these are players who I think there's no doubt about it would be able, if a team's high enough up the pitch, as they were that first half at Blackburn. You saw how that came together. That for me is something I would be clinging to in this period. That we've seen that from a Manning team. And okay, Blackburn, maybe didn't help themselves that day, but Norwich were good. I don't think it was a case that Blackburn were poor necessarily in the first half at Ewood. Norwich were just proactive. Went to Ewood Park with a mindset that, no, we're going to get the ball, we're going to control, we're going to set the tempo in this game. And you saw how close those units were. It wasn't Topic and McLean looking up and they were having to hit, like yesterday, massive diagonals to connect with Jallow and Quisgard and Sargent. It was much closer together, much more compact. The defence were much higher at Blackburn and Coventry. So, it's almost that, well, we've seen that, but we need to see that needs to be the norm rather than the exception. And at the moment, unfortunately, that is the exception, that we see these islands of control on the ball and something that is akin to, right, well, I can see a pattern there. I can see what they're trying to do. The players seem to understand the responsibilities and what they're being asked to do. It's working individually. It's working collectively. And then you're just then trying to build on that. What we got at Coventry, unfortunately, was quite a retrograde step for me in that aspect of, can they be able to have their spells? And of course, you're not going to go to Coventry and not have to defend and not have to cough up opportunities and not have to put bodies on the line. That's a given. But it was the scale of how Norwich had to do that yesterday, which clearly underscored that on the ball they were nowhere near good enough. And that now that's going to be the grading stick, if you want, of what Manning is trying to do with this group. Is if they can't improve on that facet, then this isn't going to get any better, unfortunately, for all concerned, because they will continue to win a game, and then they'll continue to draw a game, and then they'll lose a game, because without that control, it's very hard to see how you can string consistency together in results and performances. And it's only through consistency in both of those metrics that you are going to get yourself up this table. And the sooner that happens, the better, because unfortunately what you don't want is a situation where maybe the second part of this season it starts to come together, but you've left yourself too much to do. So, and Liam Manning's fully aware of that. It can't be a come back and judge us in January. No, it needs to happen pretty quickly, and particularly now in this clump of games, given some of the sides they're playing, including a certain team over the border in blue. This is a cycle that will frame maybe the season, but also the mood around the group. In terms of the fan base, travelled in huge numbers again. Would have expected to see Blackburn and more in terms of in possession, and they got something akin to Southampton in the League Cup. And I know it was different personnel and a different competition, but they were just so far off an opponent, a championship opponent. So yeah, that is now, I guess, it's going to be less about defensively when you look at a Liam Manning, how you benchmark what he's doing and the coaching impact he's having. And it is now all going to be, I think, exclusively from this point onwards about midfield control, forwards connected to the midfield, and just a far more cohesive approach, as we saw from Coventry. And I don't think as we get into this season, it's a process and we're on this evolutionary path and it's going to take time. That will wear thin, and increasingly that will wear thin because reasonably they're going to, now with each passing week, particularly now they go into a non-midweek cycle. That's a block of time at Colney to work on things. Likewise, when they go from Wrexham into Stoke, I think it is. Yep. So these are key areas now within the season as a broader, canvas that the work has to go in, and then something has to emerge pretty quickly that is better in that key area of control of the ball, patterns of play, pushing teams back through what you can do in possession rather than the opposite, which you still need to have, but maybe not quite to the degree that they've had to exhibit at Portsmouth. Let's be honest. Blackburn in the second half, even though they were down to 10 men, that was a dig-in job. And then certainly yesterday as well. That isn't it's commendable, but it's not sustainable.
Yes, absolutely. I think to almost close this section, I completely agree with that last statement as well, because and this is where results in isolation can almost lie to you a little bit game by game, because you can, again, it's that contradiction between a result being good but not necessarily the performance and the performance markers as well. It felt like, if you want to compare it to something, it felt like a game in the cup almost, where you've got a lower league team playing a higher league team, and they're just trying to hold on for dear life not to concede a goal and to stay in the contest. And clearly that is not Norwich City's objectives. That being said, am I concerned 5 games in that this is where they are? No. Would I be concerned if this is where they are after 15, 20 games? Yes. So it is naturally part of their growth and their teething process. And also I think Liam Manning, as you said a few times, did identify that, didn't beat about the bush, did acknowledge all of that. That's a positive. And equally, he's made this point as well as a lot. It's about, actually, when you're not at your best, Norwich were far from it yesterday, as we've spoken about, can you still get something? Can you still not get beat? And they did that. And that ultimately is a positive. If that's the base level, and we've spoken about it so much last season, their sort of low levels were threes, if you want to put it on a number category, and at their best they were 8s, and there wasn't really any between that. Well, actually, if you can bring that floor up, that actually when you are a 3 or a 4, you can still get results. That's not a bad place to be in a league that's all about consistency and relentlessness and just constantly churning away and chipping away at points. So there is that contradiction. That being said, I think the points on possession is probably the biggest bit for me where I'm at this morning, because ultimately, why is Harry Darling absolutely out of juice on the edge of his own 6-yard box, making such a decision that is so tired in terms of mind and with his body as well, both the execution of that touch, but also the fact he felt he needed it. Well, ultimately, it's because Norwich have had to withstand so much pressure because their quality in possession hasn't been good enough. It hasn't relieved enough of that. Why are Norwich City? And again, we haven't even spoken about the gamesmanship, if you want. I felt, just my personal view, that it went too far yesterday. There was too much of it. That's why there was so much stoppage time. But equally, why did they have to do that? It's because their quality on the ball wasn't good enough. They couldn't relieve pressure in kind of any other way other than surviving in that sense and soaking up that pressure than to try and chip away at the clock in that sense. And if you do that, you add more time, then you are going to get more tired, more fatigued decisions towards the end of the game. And that's why ultimately I think we found themselves where we did. And I think it's worth noting as well, clearly there was an element of game state in terms of Norwich were protecting a lead. They're always going to be more pragmatic. There's always going to be more pressure, but it's the level and extent of that, and it was too much, and it was too great, and Coventry had too much success in what they were trying to do throughout the afternoon. And I think that probably underscores the point of the discussion we've had in the opening 34 minutes. So hopefully we've balanced that nicely, and we're not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination everybody panic and hit the panic button and where on earth are they going? That's not the suggestion at all. I think it's more just where they're at, and obviously on that game cycle, hopefully adding some context of what the opening 5 games has been. Paddy, let's speak positively about Matthias Grisgoren, because I think we've been talking about him for a few weeks in terms of there's been some really high quality flashes that we've seen from him. A player, again, like so many of them, still getting up to speed, not just with his own fitness, but with the intensity of the championship. Obviously, we hope that knee injury, first and foremost, isn't anything serious. Didn't look good in real time. Always difficult ones with knees, but goodness me, he took his goal well. And it's about the finish, and I know he was helped by a deflection, but for me, it is that quality of the first touch, to shift it from right to left, to create that almost half a yard of space to get the shot away, that is just exquisite, that shows sort of the quality that he possesses. There was another moment as well where he fed Josh Sargent in. What we did see of him yesterday, and as we've spoken about, it was very limited from an attacking sense, but it was quite exciting, I thought, what he did show in his flashes, and probably what he's shown really since being a Norwich City player. And dare I say, that finish was quite Pukki-esque.
Well, that's a good analogy. Yeah, sort of going through the legs, almost, a bit Shearer-esque as well, into the bottom corner. Well, I mean, we said not that we need to go back to sort of pre-game, but on the team news, there was, I think, a question about any concern that he hadn't sort of hit his straps yet in terms of goals, and you looked at that Brombu goal contribution record. I'm trying to do it off the top of my head. I think it's about 66 and about 130 odd appearances for Bromby. So to me, that's a guarantee that it wasn't a case of can he score goals at this level. It's just a case of when. And he'd only had his first start in the league with Josh Sargent in the prior championship game before the international break. So I personally didn't have any sort of fears that what have they got here in terms of Quistguard. You can see what they've got, and that goal graphically illustrated. It was the 2 touches beforehand for me when he took it in from Medic, and just the low centre of gravity, couple of quick touches, brought it away from that Bobby Thomas, and then he reverses it back through Thomas's legs. I think just a guy who knows what it takes in and around the penalty area, and we'd seen enough evidence of that his instincts are to get in the box and get on the end of things. But that was very encouraging, that goal, the quality of it, and also the efficiency, because he didn't have too much else really, if anything, in terms of in terms of shots on goal. So to convert like that, that in itself as well, we haven't seen that in a Norwich shirt. But if he's a guy who doesn't need to have 5 chances to get 1 or 2 goals, then particularly in this phase where Norwich are just trying to find their feet almost in possession, then having an option like that is more than welcome. Again, it takes a bit of the pressure off Sargent if there's another focal point at the front end of the attack who could score goals. The big concern, is just that injury, and we're recording this less than 24 hours after the game. They'll be scanning him now today, I'd imagine. Further tests. Liam, all he would say was that he just felt something in his knee. It went a bit wobbly, I think he said. Now that's a concern in itself to get that sort of initial feedback. So, we hope that there's some good news there, because if he was out for any length of time, then you would be a little bit concerned, I think.
Yeah, and to add another sort of attacking player who I was really impressed with. It was only a small cameo, but Jovan Makama I thought was excellent in terms of the presence that he added. And I think that we could probably widen this out in terms of a debate on that right side, because I think it was another one of those games for Antti Sienats where he just kind of disappeared a little bit. I thought defensively in the first half he did not offer any protection at all to Kellen Fisher against what was a very dangerous winger in Mason Clark, and obviously De Silva on top of that. In his defence, it looked to me at times like he was almost trying to press Liam Kitchen and was going inside, and then when Coventry broke that press, it was suddenly 2v1 a lot. So whether that was what he was being instructed or whether that's what he was doing just because that's what he felt was best at that time, we ultimately don't know. But it just hasn't really caught fire yet. And I think with Makama, certainly yesterday, the presence he gives, the size of him is one, but it's the power, it's the technique as well that he's got. If we were going to cliche it and go down the old-fashioned route, it's the big touch or good touch for a big man, isn't it? But there's a lot to like, I think, and you can see certainly in terms of raw materials why Norwich City were quite attracted to bringing him in, because it does feel like from a player profile perspective, there's a lot to work with him.
Yeah, I mean, there's an explosiveness to his movement as well. And he is physically, he's a very imposing figure, and it's an interesting one. You're drawing a parallel with Cernak, because how many more chances does that guy get now? I think I'm right in saying he started every game, or if not the majority of the games. He was candid enough. Sam interviewed him over the international break, and he said he needs to do more. He knows that himself. I don't know. It looks to me, just talking of physicality, it looks like he's gone away and bulked up this season. He's come back more powerful. Has that took an edge off his game? I don't know. He just seems to me his movement is a bit more laboured. It felt he was a bit more dynamic in his movements. And obviously, we know last season was good periods and not so good periods, but he still finished in terms of his goal contributions. I think there was a stat, wasn't it? Ben Napper told us in the summer. Was it players under 21 or something? He was in the Championship goal contributions wise. He was right up there.
Yeah, it was only Mayenda and Chris Rigg, I think, who were younger than him and had more goal contributions in the league. So look, there is potential there, but again, and this is, and there's so many of these, I think, in Norwich's squad. It's the difficulty, and again, this isn't his fault, but Norwich signed him for £8.5 million. That conversation from a supporter perspective, you don't want to hear constantly, he's got potential. At some point, that potential does need to be converted into substance and championship reliability. And again, it still feels like we're in that sort of flux with him, where you sort of get one good game in 3, 4, 5, and for the outlay that, and again, it's not his fault that is what it is, but that the outlay that Norwich spent, the expectation is a little bit more than that, isn't it? From his perspective, and it still feels like he's kind of feeling his way into the team. And of course, we know Josh Sargent's a very real example. He's playing on the right. That seems to be where Liam Manning, and also he sort of favours himself, but. We can see this period between 21 and 24, which is what Sargent had. It can be, it can accelerate very, very quickly. But at the moment, it doesn't really show signs of doing that. And that's where I think that some people are struggling with him in this team at the moment. And maybe actually it could be an impact from the bench, where at this moment in time he could be more beneficial. I don't know. We'd have to see. But it just doesn't really feel like he is sort of taking steps forward at the moment, which is a shame, because I think there is some really. There is talent in there, and we've seen it in fits and starts, as you say, and it's just, I guess, about unlocking that. But they don't really feel any closer to unlocking it now than maybe they did at various points last season.
No, and the reason we're having this debate is because I think we can all see, and have seen in that first season, there is a player there, absolutely. But by his own admission, go back to that interview, he hasn't delivered this season, and he doesn't look a goal threat. Okay, he got the flick on for the penalty at Ewood Park, but you'd want a lot more than that from him. And it all flows into why it feels very disjointed and still very much a work in progress in the midfield and forward areas of this team. There's elements, you look across those units and you think, well, they've surely got a good enough players, but finding the right blend, that's still the ongoing process. And maybe there is a justifiable argument that you take him out of the side for a period and maybe let Mahama have a go and see what that does to the individually, but also collectively. Because it feels like, if we're being honest, he's kind of being carried at the minute in this side, and where Norwich are in the moment under Manning, that you can't have that really. You need every single component optimised and performing to as near their best as they can. Harry Darling has come in and he is slipped into the top gear very early on. Medic, I agree, that was definitely a massive leap forward yesterday. Kovacevic, likewise. These players, Topic, these players who've come in and not had the season's worth. Darling, I'll take out the equation, but the lads from overseas have not had the season of adjustment that Cernak has had. All those things he's had in his favour. I think it's reasonable to expect. That's even parking the price tag, which, as you say, has got absolutely nothing to do with him. I think it's reasonable to expect far more from him at this moment in time, and particularly now as well. It's not like the first few games where he was tried in that sort of double 10 central role and he looked a little bit like he didn't quite understand what was being asked of him and a little bit uncomfortable in those pockets. He's now on an area of the pitch on the right hand side he's certainly more comfortable with. and played most of his football there last season, and it's still not really happening. So, that for me is probably one of the more urgent aspects of unlocking this sort of midfield forward line cohesive control element, which was graphically missing at Coventry. And it's not only, let's pile in on Antti Cernach, there's plenty of other aspects of, I thought, central midfield yesterday. It just didn't look like a unit that was, and to be fair, they might argue rightly that maybe there was a little bit outnumbered there in the centre of the park. Coventry had maybe an extra player in there a lot of the time, which is obviously more on Manning and his coaching staff and the tactical sort of side of these games. But Topic and McLean were very, very good at Blackburn, and I thought less so yesterday. And you just can't have those peaks and troughs, and that applies to Cernach. That applies to any individual. There's too much inconsistency in performance levels at this stage of this season under Manning, and that's why I think it probably is going to be time for Maatsen, because the whole idea of adding the quality and the depth they hope they've added in this squad is that they don't have to necessarily persist too long with players who maybe aren't performing to the levels that Manning would expect and the supporters would expect and the players themselves would expect. He's now got options that he can, take you out, you go in, and let's see where we're going. Because for me, it probably has reached the point where personnel needs to be shuffled slightly, just to try and affect, as they did with Quistgarden coming in from Blackburn onwards. That has added something clearly in terms of an attacking dimension. So maybe it's time to roll a dice once or twice more in those areas, midfield and forward areas.
Yeah, completely agree. It was the point I was going to come on to, actually, about just the blend probably in midfield and wide areas. And if there's one reflection on the transfer window that I had probably afterwards, is you feel they're a little bit light in those wide areas. For example, Diallo yesterday, I didn't think it was his best afternoon. We've seen him probably be more explosive, more effective than that. It's kind of then, well, in other positions, you can kind of look at it and go, well, even left back, right back. Okay, well, Kellen Fisher's not doing the job, for example. Jack Stacey comes in left back. Well, Ben Krasene goes off injured. Well, hopefully in a few weeks, you've got Lucian Mahovo, you've got Jeffrey Schlupp. Forward line with Josh Sargent, if in some unreal parallel universe where Josh Sargent isn't performing or scoring goals, we've got Mateus Criscore and you've got Jovan Makama. You're looking at both of those wide positions. Left side, again, maybe you've got a Schlupp that can go in there, but it feels a bit like a square peg in a round hole. On the right side, we've got Mate Jurasek, but I don't think either of us have seen enough of him at the moment to say with any real definitiveness that he can have an impact at championship level. We saw Liam Gibbs go to the left yesterday after Diallo went off, and is that so? I think there's maybe a little bit of a shortage there, and clearly that is there is a need on a Jurasek and on others to come to the table and provide some challenge in those areas, but also those central midfield areas. We've just done a section speaking about possession. You think about where Norwich have looked best on the ball. For me, it was away at Watford in that first half, and it was at Portsmouth in that first half. Dare I say his name? They were both with Marcelino Nunez in the team. But they were. That's where Norwich have looked best on the ball. And maybe the argument and the solution is Pelle Maatsen comes in and adds that, but we just don't know that's going to be the case. Jacob Wright, I think, has struggled more with what he's been on, the added level of responsibility, the extra running that is required in a Liam Manning midfield compared to what he had last year. But clearly there's a technical level there. If he can add that, I think he could be a very effective use to this midfield. So for me, it's more about, do they have the profiles in the areas in that midfield that can almost, the levels of difference that gives them different options? Because, like you said, I think some of the possession debate that we've had is also a personnel debate to an extent. And I think if you're Liam Manning, those are the elements now that you need to solve. Clearly, again, Makama can play out wide, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a natural fit. You look at the size and presence of him, he feels more to me like a number 9 than he does a winger on what we've seen. But that said, he came on against Millwall, didn't he, out wide, and had a really good impact. So it just feels to me they're a little bit short in wide areas of options, and maybe they're a little bit short in points of difference in midfield. And hopefully Pelle Maatsen can come in and be that point of difference from a possession perspective in midfield. I don't know your thoughts on that, Paddy, really.
No, I'd concur. Yeah, I mean, we're told. I mean, I can't confess that I've seen a huge amount of Pelle Maatsen, but that his passing range is very good, and he has those attributes. Whether we know he's not a like for Nunez, but if he possesses that ability, and also the combativeness, the tigerishness that you need to go with it, then I think we need to see him sooner rather than later, because this is a player they tracked for quite a considerable amount of time. We know the backstory over the summer. And I would be of the opinion, if I'm Liam Manning now, I mean, it's not a case of just discarding players and putting them to the side and that's it, I'm done with them. Clearly, as the season evolves, you get the injuries, the suspensions. Jacob Wright was in the side. He gets himself red carded at Borough. He's out of the side. That's inevitable. But you'd like to start seeing something emerge that is not every. It feels at the moment every game to game we're still debating. Well, could that player go in there? If not performing, then another lead player needs to come in. What we'd hoped, given he went unchanged lineup from Blackburn to Coventry, was that was almost a redundant debate now. But unfortunately, we're back here again because of patchiness is probably being a bit too kind. But the nature of that performance on Saturday, it reignites, debates around personnel as much as it does about structure and patterns of play. So, yeah, I think I'm not going to speak on Liam Manning's behalf, but I would be very surprised if he's not of a mind over the next few days to arrive at a starting lineup for Wrexham that is probably quite considerably different. Hopefully not through injury in terms of Chris Garden and Creseni, but just more in terms of those midfield areas and those forward areas. I think it feels like now, particularly getting back to Carrow Road, where they do need to pick up the pace and then some. I don't think it'd be enough to, as he did rightly, say to those Blackburn starters, right, you did for me at Ewood Park, go out again and do the same thing again. Unfortunately, they didn't do that. So for me, it's time to shuffle the pack.
Yeah, and again, I think there's stuff that have settled. I think we'd all agree Vladan Kovacevic looks excellent for what he's done over this first 5 games from a shot stopping perspective, and has really grown game on game in terms of his importance, and I think his personality of goalkeeping as well. The defensive too, I think Darling's been absolutely tremendous since he's came in. I think if we stopped the season now and had a player of the season debate, I think he would win it by, or maybe Josh Sargent would have something to say about that, but I think he'd certainly be in the top 2. Medic as well, I think is growing game on game. Mirko Topic feels to me like an important component. Obviously, Kenny McLean, the reliability and stability there, I like, but again, I just feel maybe they lack a ball player in there. So again, is the solution, do you add another midfielder in? But then if you do that, you lose the Chris Gore and Sargent combo. Wide options, I'm just not sold on maybe how they're being utilised and whatnot at the moment as well. So there are, I think, areas that are settled and some that are more up for debate. And this is natural 5 games in when you've got essentially a new group of players and you've made 12 signings. That's always going to be the case, and it's about the combinations and unlocking a lot of those connections and partnerships that will be key to doing that. Paddy, one thing that was a shame yesterday, I think, was to see Ben Creseni limp off with that hamstring issue. We spoke about it a bit on the preview show, and been impressed with him this season, his performance levels, what he's contributed. He looks like he's come back, and bearing in mind he had a bad injury, he was out for a period of time. He really hit the ground running. He looked for me a far improved player, in certainly at Blackburn, and the performances that we saw. It was a shame to see that another injury, I guess, from his perspective, and certainly having watched Liam Manning's interview with you from yesterday, that seemed to be the one he was more concerned about over maybe between the Chris Gore and Creseni ones.
Yeah, that was my reading of it. Obviously, again, with a caveat, we'll find out in due course the extent of those injuries. But I mean, we're not medical types, but it was the laboured, almost sad, slow trudge, because it happened over the far side of the pitch to the main stand, and you could tell he was in a lot of discomfort as he hobbled back round behind the goal and then in front of the main stand. When they'd made the call to get him off in the second half, Liam said, it was a hamstring injury. Now we know with hamstrings that can be, depending on the grade of injury, that can be weeks, maybe even longer. So I'm just trying to think, was Forson a hamstring as well? Yeah. Well, not that I'm seeking to draw a parallel directly, but there's a player who's similarly picked up a very similar type of injury and is out for, from the last check with Liam on Wednesday, it's still a considerable amount of time. You just hope that isn't the fate that's in store for Ben, because agreed. I thought because again, we've talked a lot on this podcast about players who've come in and not really convinced. I think Jose Cordoba falls into that category. He started at least the first 2 games in that defensive 3, asked to not offer defensive protection, but also push out onto the left-hand side and offer that width and attacking play. It didn't look like came naturally to him. In contrast to Krzeni at Blackburn, looked like he was made for the role, both defensively and getting forward. And we saw glimpses of that at Coventry in the very, very fleeting moments of that first half possession that Norwich did have. Krzeni was getting on the outside of Jallo, trying to get to the byline. Obviously, the one silver lining, if it is Krzeni out for any length of time, is Mahovo back in the mix. And but with Slup now also out for a period of time, then they might have to fast track Mahovo. But there's a player who, and that's not to heap any pressure on him, but he showed enough in that small sample last season, and by all accounts, Liam says that they've physically he's come back in even greater shape now. He's grown probably and filled out a little bit. So if it was to be no Krzeni, then maybe that it's timely that Mahovo's back in the building. But that would be a blow because again, it just flows back into this quest for players who you wouldn't ink them in, but you'd say, well, they look like the best option in that position. I think he, at the moment, feels the best option on that left-hand side of the defence. And if he was to come out the side, it's another variable. It's another dollop of uncertainty into what Manning's trying to get to, which is a point where, like Coventry, yes, they like his Bristol side last season. It's almost intuitive. It's almost the players can be just dropped in and out. They all know their jobs. They know their roles. They know what they've been asked to do in and out of possession, the shape, the structure. All that becomes second nature. Right now, it's very much a finding the ingredients and trying to find that right blend. And to remove Krzeni and potentially Quistgaard is not going to improve the chances of getting that blend in the time that they're hoping to bring this together.
No, absolutely not. Paddy, how was your journey home last night? Was it nice and smooth?
Well, I'm down in London at the moment, Connor. Anybody's wondering, these aren't my books. I'm not that intellectual.
I was going to say, you're not short of reads, are you, behind you?
No, that's my father-in-law and mother-in-law. So I had to come down for a birthday party, one of my wife's friends. So I got away quickly. The reason I'm talking about my travel is that we both were in the same car park at the CBS, a local school. But I got there about an hour before you, and I was the second to last car. So I'm now going to move it over to you, Connor, and say what happened when you got there about an hour after me.
Yeah, it wasn't my best day in general. I think that's probably fair to say. So, like you say, we had a couple more things to finish. So left a little bit after you. Walked back to it was what, about 10-15 minute walk back to the car park. Nothing major. Where you were turning in, it was like a little side road, so you didn't actually see the entrance until you got right to the very end of that road. And we got to the end, and the gates that you had walked through a little time earlier and driven out of, more crucially, were shut, bolted, lights were off. There was nobody to be seen. There was a small intercom to the right, which I presume is just like the school one that parents can go and contact to try and get into the school for whatever reason. Use that, no answer. We were stuck. The car was one side of the gate. We were the other. I don't think that's ever happened before. I mean, we've cut it fine a few times for car parks, haven't we? Because the nature is obviously we have to stay behind to conduct the interviews and write the words and edit the videos and all of that stuff. So it does add some time onto it. And it's worth adding as well, there was no stipulation. Some of the car parks on offer did say that they closed an hour, 2 hours, etc. after kickoff. There wasn't any with this one, so we thought we'd be okay. And yeah, then it was just an hour really of panic and trying to work out what on earth we do from there, because it looked like at one stage we were going to be having to leave the car in Coventry and then try and sort of get back via trains and Ubers, and it was becoming quite expensive. Thankfully, and I'll give a shout out to Tom in the Coventry media team, who I know a little bit because he used to cover Southampton, and we had a little bit of dialogue back then. I managed in a very frenzied phone call to him, basically asking if there was anyone he could call or knew who had a key. And after some brilliant investigation work from him at his end, and obviously thanks to the Coventry guys that we don't know who were involved in that, they managed to pass on a contact for the Coventry City Council emergency team, out of hours team, and I spoke to a gentleman called Steve who was a bit confused about why we'd parked in a primary school, why it was open, and if we were allowed to park there in the first place. But once I did explain, was very helpful, And I think within about an hour and a half of that whole process from start to finish, a hero in shining armour and a torch and some keys arrived to open the gates to let us out. And I'm very grateful for that.
What time was this then, Connor? So what time are you leaving Coventry?
We left Coventry. It was about 9 o'clock, I think.
Yeah,
having turned up to that car park about 7:15, and I think probably doing the calculation. I mean, you got there about 6:45, so I think we were probably 15 minutes late from when they bolted it and the keys were on the door. So we got back into Norwich just before midnight, which wasn't the way you would expect to get back from Coventry. And then to top it off, as people probably on this podcast now, and we don't like to talk about food too much, but there was a certain cuisine on the menu at Coventry that and look, we're not knowing no place, and we're very fortunate that we
you're on thin ice there,
these places, but it just wasn't to my taste, so I hadn't eaten, so I was particularly hungry. That's the point I'm making. It wasn't necessarily anything other than that. So yeah, it wasn't the best day all told. So by the end of it, I was glad to be on the road home, and actually you'd forgotten all about the various conflictions that you felt about the result as well. So I'm sure the Norwich fans had a very smoother journey than perhaps me and Sam did on the way home yesterday. But there we go, that's the way it goes. Paddy, just to finish the pod, then it's a return to Carrow Road next week. It's Hollywood's finest coming to town, and all of you like to use the phrase circus. It does feel like the circus is coming to town a little bit when Wrexham arrive, having spent a lot of money. They've had not the start they wanted to the championship campaign. There's some reports that there's maybe some questions being asked of Phil Parkinson, which feels very harsh after back-to-back promotions and clearly all the money spent. We know their aspirations as well. Feels like an opportunity, doesn't it, for Norwich to get going at Carrow Road, and it feels probably a little bit overdue. We've spoken a little bit about this. If they can beat Wrexham next weekend, suddenly you're talking about 7 points from 3 games, and everything's rosy in the garden again, alongside clearly winning in front of your home fans, which is something they haven't been able to do so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, it's that aspect for me, Connor. That's the big one now, because okay, they've got a point at Coventry, but we've spent thick end of an hour now discussing that it was despite of rather than because of the performance level. So off the back of 3 defeats at Carrow Road, it's not the be all and end all to get the win, because I think they need to show something a bit more in terms of performance, but you think one would go hand in hand with the other, and that is a little bit worrying if Parkinson's under pressure, because that might produce a performance. It could go the other way, of course, but I think from Norwich's perspective, you get the win, and you achieve it in a style that feels a bit more sort of sustainable in terms of on the ball. That is for sure. Then you can then go on and attack Stoke and West Brom and Ipswich, and we don't want to talk up the alternative reality, but if that Carrow Road curse is continued next weekend, then I think there'll be even more questions being asked about this current sort of Manning project and where it is right now. We all know where it needs to get to, where they hope to get it to, but there might be another dose of reality coming if they labour to a non-performance or heaven forbid, don't pick up any points this weekend. I think it's just and again, you don't want to get buffeted by everything's great and then everything's lousy, and it's always a bit more nuanced than that. But I just do think for the general mood around it now, particularly at Carrow Road, those away fans, to be fair, I've seen Portsmouth, Blackburn, and now Coventry, 7 points from 9, real committed performances from those side. And as Liam said, after the game, even though they conceded as late as they did, they went over there, and the reaction they got from the fan base told him that they appreciated the level of commitment that team had showed, and I don't think anyone would dispute that. But those at Carrow Road who maybe don't go on the road, they've seen a very different face of this Liam Manning Norwich rebuild so far, and they need to see a far more positive one this weekend, irrespective of whether it was Wrexham and what they've got to deal with or whoever. I just think it's very important now that Norwich collectively, individually, step it up in terms of in possession and that control element there, retain the elements that they've shown on the road, that resistance and resolution, and get the job done. And then we can, then we'll lurch back towards everything is brilliant, and now it's going to be top 2, which will be too far the other way. But at least we're not in, as you say, you've used the word quite often on this podcast, it's a conflicted status at the moment. You see positive traits, you see negative traits. You're not quite sure where to pitch the tent at the moment. And that probably applies for a lot of Norwich fans. Nobody really, on the evidence of 5-6 games now, could really, I think, with any great certainty, predict where this is going under Liam Manning. It might catch and on they go. It could plateau, and then that's a different scenario entirely. So, yeah, for those reasons, I think it exponentially feels bigger, this one at Carrow Road, because of what they haven't produced over the previous 3 games there.
Yeah, us reactionary say what we're like. Yeah, and I think also that point you make, it's okay to feel conflicted. It's okay to be confused. I think about maybe where they are. It's still early. A lot of stuff still has to settle. And as we said earlier, just because of what we've spoken about and some of those issues, that doesn't mean they won't improve and they won't get there. Hopefully they will. And then we'll be saying about how brilliant it is, this journey they've been on, and the fact they've been able to put it together. It's part of building a team, and it's part of obviously a new coach feeling his way into a job as well. There are areas that I'm sure he is learning about his group and trying to find some of those connections that we spoke about a little bit earlier on. And they're still very, very early on in their process. And equally, it doesn't help really that they've faced in their opening 5 games a Millwall team that's been very settled, a Middlesbrough team who, they've changed head coach, but in terms of personnel are very settled. Portsmouth team who are very settled and very good manager there in John Mousinho, and obviously yesterday as well a Cov team who have so much momentum under Frank Lampard, and to me certainly by far and away the best team that Norwich have played in the opening 5 games. I mean, forget top 2, I think you'd probably be placing them maybe even in a higher conversation than that. And of course we'll hopefully, the hope is that Norwich can get better and in these type of situations gradually improve the levels, and hopefully that will be the case as the season transpires. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. If you've done so on YouTube, because we record these every week, and as I always say, you can, if you listen, you can watch us. If you watch us, you can, and you don't want to see our faces, which is totally understandable, you can listen as well. Make sure you leave a like, subscribe, all of that stuff. We've have these weekly alongside hopefully a lot of other video and audio offerings, and we will be back after that game next weekend against Hollywood's finest Wrexham, and hopefully we're talking about a first Carrow Road win. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time.